IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. The name Sassoon is known in cities as far as apart as Mumbai and Shanghai, London and Hong Kong. In Mumbai, many public institutions bear the name, from docks to schools to synagogue. This family of Baghdadi Jews were prominent businessmen of 19th century Bombay, where they made their fortune after leaving Mesopotamia as refugees. Succeeding generations initially expanded their wealth and also became prominent in public life, including in politics in Britain. Their story has now been written about in great detail by Joseph Sassoon, one of the descendants of the founder, David Sassoon. Global Merchants, the enterprise and extravagance of the Sassoon Dynasty, is a fascinating saga of the rise and fall of this family, who were often called the Rothschilds of the East. Joseph Sassoon is a professor of history and political economy at Georgetown University and joins us today to talk about the book and the Sassoons. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Joseph Sassoon.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
So my first question is, how did the idea to write a book on your ancestors come about? Because there's not much on them. I presume you had access to family archives and also other archives. But how did the idea first strike you?
Well, I really was never interested in doing a history. There are a couple of books that were published back in the 1930 and 1950 by journalists who interviewed some of the Sassoons who were alive then. And it was all based on, he said, she said, rather than any archive. So I was not interested. And then, as I write in the preface of the book, someone emailed me. I was on a fellowship at Oxford University and sent me a letter, not an email, telling me that he's a Sassoon and he would like to talk to me. So I did have a conversation. And he is an elderly gentleman who lived in Western Scotland. And I, at some point, went to see him that summer, a beautiful place. And then he started showing me pictures of the family and letters, and I was intrigued, I have to say. And then when I went back to Oxford, I thought, okay, let me go to London to the archives and start seeing, just out of curiosity. I actually was writing a book at the time about authoritarianism in the Middle East, totally different. And then I came across one line in one of the publications that the National Library in Jerusalem has archives. And I thought, again, I am in London, it's a few-hour flight, so I flew there, and I sat in the National Library, and I was overwhelmed. They had 100,000 documents, all kept in endless boxes. And the family seems to really have kept every scrap for some reason. All business correspondence, but also diaries, ledgers of trades, anything you can think of, even exercise books for children were kept there. And I realized not many people have used this material, although it has been in the library for decades, because of the language that the correspondents use, which is a Baghdadi Jewish dialect. So you need to know the Baghdadi dialect, you need to know Arabic, and you need to know Hebrew in order to decode these documents. And of course, the writing also was another layer of difficulty. But that's really what got me in. When I found this incredible trove, I realized this has not been done, and I would love to do it.
Joseph wasn't belonging to the clan, to the dynasty, an advantage, but also a challenge, and could raise, any critic or reader could say, it raises accusations of conflict of interest. How did you maintain objectivity while writing it? So was that a challenge?
It was not really. I tell you, more kind the challenge were from a historical point of view, trying to decode all those archives. The family is very complicated in the sense that the founder, David Sassoon, had the first wife died. She after having 4 children. The second wife bore him 10 children. So think about it, 14 children, each one got married, had on average 5. And the worst part of it is that they had so many similar names of David and Rachel and Farha and Joseph, even in the same generation. But going back to what you asked, I think there are 2 points. One, it was such a long time ago. We're talking almost about 200 years ago where the story begins. I felt zero attachment. I don't know anyone, neither of them or their descent. Second of all, I mean, technically, I'm not a direct descendant of David Sassoon. So when David Sassoon fled Baghdad to go to Bombay, his siblings stayed behind in Baghdad. I'm the descendant of one of those siblings. But to be honest, because of the time, I had zero emotion about it or feeling, oh, I have to protect this one or show this one. I mean, maybe direct descendants of the family are upset with me about some of the things that I wrote, but I'm a historian. I have to record what history it was.
Yes, and what a fascinating history. So, people, I'm sitting in Bombay right now, and about less than a mile away from my home is the David Sassoon Library, which was, of course, as you know, the Mechanics Institute.
Yes.
And not too far away is the Sassoon Dock. Then there are synagogues. So most people know that they were based here. Most people know that they were Baghdadi Jews, but they don't know why they landed up in Bombay and why, after being such influential people, the treasurers to the pashas of Baghdad, they had to leave. So tell us a bit more.
Sure. So a number of things. One is he fled not because of anti-Semitism. As it happens, governors in these provinces changed from time to time. It was really the misfortune that a very corrupt governor arrived in Baghdad. And what happened is that he started trying to embezzle money from all merchant families, irrelevant of religion. And the way he would do it, he would arrest a member of a family and ask for a ransom, almost like a gang. And so he did arrest David Sassoon. His father, who was the prominent person and the treasurer, paid the ransom, but realized this is not going to end with one ransom. Next time, something worse is going to happen to his son or one of his other children. So literally, when he was released from the prison, he told David Sassoon to go and escape to Iran via Basra. And then the father joined him because he was worried about himself, but the siblings stayed. And the story is really fascinating because when he was in Iran, he could have gone to any of the Gulf countries because a lot of merchant families resided there, particularly from Baghdad. But I think through contact with sailors, traders in Bushehr, and already back in Baghdad with the British, he started hearing about Bombay. And it is, to me, sitting now with the world of internet and technology, fascinating. How do you make a decision to take your family to some unknown place where there is no information apart from word of mouth? You do not know anyone. You do not have a relative. And you just pack them and put them on a boat from Bushehr to go to Bombay, in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And I don't have to tell you what the state of shipping was in 1830 or 1829. But one thing guided him, and that really, you could see it throughout. is the fact that he was told that in Bombay, people don't care about religion or sect. And as long as you work and you make progress, people will welcome you. And he believed that. And it's really amazing. So he packed his family and he went there. But he was proven to be right. His gut feeling that this is the place. And he really believed in it. And you see it in his will when he dies, David Sassoon, in 1864. He doesn't want any of his houses to be sold for 51 years. That tells you something, because his son was already, in his 40s, 50s. He knew, at the time, especially, people didn't live until 100. But because that was home, and everything he dreamt about materialized in Bombay.
That's a testimony to Bombay's cosmopolitanism then, and as much now in many ways, because it's the most cosmopolitan city in the country. And really speaking, it doesn't really matter your gender or your community and all that. It goes up and down, but at that time there were Armenians, there were Turks, there were Arabs, and there were all kinds of people. But Bombay must have been a highly competitive city at the time. And here's an outsider who lands up to do business. The economy was growing in the early 19th century. But surely a businessman already entrenched in the city must have wondered why he should do business of any kind with somebody who's landed up out of nowhere and has no references.
So you're absolutely right. And it is really interesting. And I wish I can go back in time. But a few things to remember. One, the cosmopolitan aspect, you're absolutely correct. But two, it was relatively a small city of 200,000 across the board. And one thing comes very clear. There is competition, but there is also kind of professionalism, almost gentleman respect for each other. I mean, he goes and starts talking to the Parsis community and the traders. He talks to the British traders, and it comes across that he is really learning from them by talking to. And there were, from the Tatas to Gigi to Jardine Matheson, there were these entrepreneurs. And some kind of real respect existed between all those people. There was competition, but there was also a decorum that they all respected.
So as long as he could talk the language of business, he was welcome. And if he met the Tatas and the Gigi boys and the Jardines, clearly he got into the thick of things straight away, landed more or less on his feet. But he didn't have too much money. I think he left behind a fair amount.
He did not have, and he started very slow. And people always ask, what did he do that made him wealthy? There really isn't a one trade or one act that made him suddenly very wealthy or famous. It was literally step by step. I mean, in the beginning, he describes how he went to the cotton exchange and he would stand there and talk to the traders and to the messengers and just absorbing information. He realized at a very, very early stage, and this is critical, that being in Bombay is different from being in Baghdad. International news are much more important. And he starts becoming very attuned to what is happening. For example, in the 1850s, he sees that cotton prices are going up in Bombay because the south of America, the United States, had a very bad harvest. And the connection becomes very clear to him. One bad news internationally is leading to increasing prices. And that actually what got him into the cotton trade, saying, wow, there are opportunities. But again, he begins a very small, and if you look at the newspapers in Bombay or the Indian archives, he really barely appears. He definitely doesn't appear throughout the 1830s. He starts appearing in the mid-1840s as a really one small trader. The turnaround begins in the late 1840s. And the big changes that takes place is the Opium War that opens China.
We come now to the opium trade. You know, many of the big families of the time and even today, and it's a myth to think that there were only Parsis involved in it. There were all kinds of communities. But whatever, many of the big business houses, big fortunes were made in opium. But generally speaking, many of these prominent families or descendants of those early traders try to play down this. You've written quite a bit on the opium trade of David Sassoon, and rather his son and his family. Is that something you have to understand, confront, to understand really what was going on at the time?
I had really to learn a lot. I mean, I knew or read that they traded opium, but I didn't realize the deep involvement. I would say just a number of things. One, trade of opium has been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, the East India Company had a monopoly on opium 200 years, and none of these families, Sassoons or Tatas or Dynasty, Gigi, or anyone had any involvement until the late 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. Two, I think what really changed for the Sassoon and for the others, that it was a British policy. I mean, opium became the cornerstone of India's finances. 16% of India's revenues were from opium. I mean, that's huge. And so your superpower, the colonial power, is encouraging everyone to trade into this, becomes legal, so all these families enter it. I did not shy from discussing all the aspects of it. My biggest criticism towards the family was actually not engaging in it, because they saw it, all of them, as a commodity, not different from any other commodity. I think the main criticism starts increasing towards the end of the 19th century, when there were clear signs and evidence that it has very, very significant adverse effect. Having said all that, and just to put it in context for the listeners, I think that the British government was so much defending it. So in 1893, because of criticism, political criticism, newspaper, the church is opposing it, they create a commission of inquiry. 4.5 years. I have it in my room here. 7 volumes, 2,500 pages. They interviews hundreds of doctors, including, in addition to something in total like 10,000 interviews. What is the conclusion? The conclusion that the effect has been exaggerated, that the adverse physical and emotional impact of opium is totally out of proportion. That was the end of the conclusion. Case closed. There is nothing to do about it. Of course, the finance of India was in the back mind of the people who created the Commission of Inquiry. But it's also fascinating when you read testimonies of medical experts who come in front of the commission and are asked about the opium, and they said, no, Indian mothers have been using it for 5,000 years. Indian peasants have not become, there was 1 million Indian peasants growing this crop. They're not getting addicted to it. there was a lot of racism about the issue of China and whether they are more prone to that. But the medical doctor said, and the same question comes up, should we ban opium? And they said, well, if you ban opium, you have to ban whiskey, because you can take a little opium, it's like having a glass of whiskey. And of course, the minute you tell the British ban the whiskey, a red flag has gone up.
So in that sense, it was a preordained conclusion.
It wasn't preordained. I mean, but it was, there was the sense that, first of all, no one in the Indian government, or definitely not among the Indian traders, wanted to stop this. Two, this thing of that there is a history to this. To be fair also, until 1907, you can go to any pharmacy in New York or London and Paris and tell the pharmacist you have a headache or indigestion, and they will prescribe for you a little opium. Opium was shown in the Financial Times, The Economist, all the major newspapers in the world on a daily basis, the commodity price no different from gold or silver. So you have to look at it, criticize the decision about it, but you have to look at it also in the context of that period.
Yeah, that's fully understandable. So you said that was your criticism regarding the family. So the family as such was not, considering there was so much criticism in the papers and the churches, the family was never conflicted about it?
Doesn't seem so. I mean, I think they really looked at it, as a trading commodity. And there was this ideology throughout the 19th century of free trade. It was an ideology for Britain, this liberalism that everything, if there is demand, there should be supply. If there's supply and people want to buy it, good for them. And this is the way they looked at it. I could not find in the archives any evidence of neither, saying, what are we doing from a kind of an ethical point of view, or from any other aspect. I think it was seen, okay, we bought opium, let's sell it. There is demand for opium. If there was demand for pearls or rice, we should engage in that trade also.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IBM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. The merchant princes of the time in the 1850s Bombay, and subsequently also, the merchant princes, the rich families, and by then the Sassoons were joining the rich families because, as you pointed out, the instrument of handing over India to the British from the company to the crown took place in the Sassoon home, Sanssouci.
Yeah.
So they were already prominent. So the big families, were the Sassoons indulging in philanthropy just to kind of give a friendly face, or did the Sassoons and the others, or the Sassoons certainly, did they actually believe in the idea of philanthropy?
I think it's really both, to be fair. I think especially David Sassoon, who began that, there is also the religious aspect of it. And because he was very religious. And I think he did believe that giving back to the community where you live is a must. So the giving was to Jewish community, but also to the city. And hence the Mechanics Institute, and hence hospital in Pune. So I think it went hand in hand. And this is really very, very important because they came with this innovative idea of taxing every trade with a philanthropy tax. No other family has done it. And remember, they were doing hundreds and hundreds of trades. And when you buy something today, a commodity, you have no idea whether you're going to sell it in 2-3 months with a profit, with a loss, or the same. And yet you taxed it, and it is no different from any other tax. And they literally put it in the ledger. Maritime cost, insurance cost, and then philanthropy tax. And that was amazing. So at the end of the year, hundreds of trades were done. As a result, huge amount of philanthropy was there to be distributed.
So when did they went from trade to manufacturing like many others? And then there was a time when they owned the most textile mills in the city. When did they start expanding further east?
Well, the real expansion already began once the Opium War ended. David sends his second son, Elias, to China to explore it. And once they explore China, they start going to places like Burma, Singapore, Java, Japan. And so And the other aspect that was taking place also, and that has helped the Sassoon, and that goes back to my point about the importance of international relations and international news. David Sassoon was the first among merchant families in India to send one of his sons to London. I mean, it was unheard of at the time, and that was in the mid-1850s. So he settled with the idea to keep an eye. But then when the American Civil War breaks out in 1861, the Sassoon almost had more intelligence about what was happening than any other family, because they were in London. They already knew people among the British officials. So they were really getting incredible information about the war and its going, while others did not have the access. So the expansion takes place, but very, very slowly, but progressively. And the more, of course, they expand, the more people they need, the more offices they open.
And yet, David Sassoon said that Bombay is now home. It gave me all this opportunity. He wrote in his will that no house should be sold for 51 years. That shows a commitment that my family is not going to move out of here. And yet, it almost sounds like one day they were here, the next day they were out. Why did they pack up and leave for Britain?
I don't think they packed and left. It was supposedly, part of the expansion. But the attraction of London and the Anglicization was overwhelming, and there is no doubt about it. And it's interesting because the oldest brother, Abdullah, who built the Sassoon docks and expanded in Pune, loved India. But he was getting these letters from his now 3 brothers in London telling him, wow, life is amazing. This party, that party, we met this one, we were with the Prince of Wales. It's amazing. It seems this glitter got him going and saying, well, I worked harder than anyone else, and I am wealthier than any one of them. Why shouldn't I enjoy it? But there was also a business aspect, and which was correct. London by the 1870s becomes the financial capital of the world, without any shadow of doubt and without much competition. And the idea, if you're not in the thick of it, you're going to miss on a lot. I mean, in a way, it would have been an amazing opportunity to expand into other businesses, but nothing happened and they stuck with what they were trading, and hence began the demise. And I argue in the book that when the first CEO woman comes to run the company in 1894, by the year 2000, it's 1900, sorry, it's over. It's over in the sense that there is no real leadership anymore. And dynasties, if they can't produce leaders and family members that want to work and be innovative, they are doomed.
So here they are parting with the Prince of Wales. There is an MP. Sassoon as an MP. They are the toast of society in a sense. Here in India, in Bombay, they move around with the governor and the most prominent families, all in the span of a few years, 70, 80 years. And then suddenly things start declining. Is it also because the number of descendants became too big and everyone got a slice of the fortune? Was there anything like that?
Definitely. It's two things. That by the third generation, not many people were interested in business and felt if they have the money, they can do. And some of them became very successful. I mean, the first woman editor in the whole history of Britain, she becomes editor of the Daily Telegraph and then the Observer. I mean, it's a huge thing. Women at the time didn't have the right to vote in Britain. And yet here is a woman who is editing a major newspaper. And of course, later on, there is Siegfried Sassoon, the famous poet. So some of them had talent, but definitely not in business. Philip Sassoon, who chaired the company for 11 years, he was a member of parliament. At some point, he was undersecretary for the Air Force in the 1920s. And in 11 years that he was officially the chairman, he did not write one letter of business. There is nothing in the archive about business. How could you be a chairman? Why? Because he's interested in art. He was a major art collection. He later on becomes head of big museums and art collections in London. And that's where their life was moving, forgetting something that if no one does the business, there will be no money in a generation or two.
So they really didn't keep up with the times. And you mentioned that the family and the descendants have grown to unimaginable numbers. Nobody knows the other, more or less. You're sitting in DC. I have met somebody, a lady who was from Ireland. I think I saw somewhere a reference to another Sassoon in Calcutta, and I'm sure there must be, others. So where is everybody now? Has anyone done a kind of family?
Well, so a number of things go on. One, a lot of intermarriages and names. I mean, one of the fun aspects of writing this book, the number of emails I get. Hi, I'm a Sassoon. I live in Los Angeles. Exactly like you're saying. Hi, I'm a Sassoon. I live in Perth, Australia. And suddenly I am corresponding with someone in Perth. It has been an amazing journey discovering these people. And they are all happy to read about the book and find the connection. A lot of them changed their names or intermarried and therefore had different names, different things. Others did not know. I mean, that's the other interesting aspect. By the time Siegfried Sassoon, and we're talking only World War I, this is not even 100 years from the time that David Sassoon escaped and went to Bombay. But Siegfried Sassoon didn't know that his ancestors are originally from Baghdad. He didn't know that his ancestors are Jewish. He thought he was English. And we are talking 100 years ago. So you can imagine what happens in the next 100 years.
Do you come across people, non-Sassoons, who say, yes, of course, I know the name?
The most is in India. I tell them it's the only country in the world where you get in a cab in Mumbai and you say Sassoon and they can ask you Sassoon Dock, Sassoon, or Pune, where I arrived in Pune before COVID for a wedding, and everyone seems to know something about the Sassoon. The next place that they know about is in Shanghai. And that's really still, there are a lot of buildings, there are a lot of names. One of the most famous buildings, which is now a beautiful hotel on the main street in Shanghai, is still called, it has a name, one of those chains, but it's outside, it's the Sassoon building, and there is the Sassoon presidential suite. In the States, not really. And in the UK, in Britain, I think the connection is mostly to Siegfried Sassoon. Sometimes they confuse and ask about Vidal Sassoon, the hairdresser, and I tell them there is no connection. He was originally from Aleppo in Syria.
So one question that I was keeping towards the end, you said that when they came to Bombay, they found that it was a fairly mixed community. So this question is actually in two parts, and really it didn't matter where he came from, what he was, etc. So the two-part question is, one, did David Sassoon or anyone from his family later on ever faced anti-Semitism in Bombay, maybe also in other centers? And two, Western India already had Bene Israelis, and there is kind of anecdotal talk, I can't prove it, that the Baghdadis and the Bene Israelis kind of kept to each other. So this is a two-part question.
Yes. So anti-Semitism was not, the anti-Semitism that they faced in India, if it came, was mostly from British officials who would, for example, they would ban non-Europeans from entering a building or club or something like that. That took place. But that was not really anti-Semitism per se. It was anti-locals or anyone who's not European. And that could be against Tata, against any Indian, and against the Sassoons. But not really in any other fashion. Here and there could be a newspaper, but guess what? It was written by a British journalist, an article. I think that in your second question, definitely there was no interconnection. And here, I think the Baghdadi Jews had wanted immediately to identify with being as European, and kept telling the British, you cannot mix us and we have nothing to do with Bnei Israel. So that's from a political point of view. But there was also a religious point of view where they felt that they are not the true kind believers or religion aspect, that they have their different tradition. So there was not a lot of contact. There is no marriage that I could find, although they lived there for a long time. But by the way, also some Sassoons did stay in India. And it is really important. So the daughter of Farha, where there is a huge chapter on her as the matriarch, her daughter and her husband live in Calcutta until the 1950s. I think she died in 1952, 1953. And her husband actually was quite, Sir David, he was not part of the business of the family, but he was, on his own business, but was also involved and a huge supporter of Indian nationalism.
So there are still a very tiny handful of Baghdadis left in Bombay.
I'm sure there is somewhere in Calcutta or Bombay somewhere.
Bombay, definitely there are a handful of Baghdadis left, mostly well-off Baghdadis, because after all, the Sassoons were not the only family to come from there. And, there is somebody whose grandfather or his grandfather-in-law was the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. called
There was
Gabe.
also in the 1970s a general in the Indian Army
That's right.
who became a mayor later on or governor of one of the
Governor,
big
that's
cities.
right. I didn't realize he was Baghdadi. I thought he was a Cochin Jew, but yes.
No, he's a Baghdadi Jew who is actually, his parents are religious originally.
Okay. So, and I hear from them that the Baghdadi Jews were different, and presumably that small communities still, of course, they have extremely cosmopolitan people, and, the city doesn't care really beyond a point. And anti-Semitism has really not been a big thing here.
No.
But I can sense that there is a sense of being different as followers of Judaism. And there is sufficient infrastructure around. There are schools, and as I said, the hospitals. Masina Hospital is the old Sansuchi.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful synagogue not far.
Absolutely, which has been renovated
That's right.
2 years ago. It's beautiful. It's really stunningly done.
So the next time you come here, I think you should.
I would love to. I've been coming to Mumbai in the last few years for research and meeting people. I really, really hope in January, with the festivals coming back, to come in person. I love the city. I really do.
Yes. So anyway, it's a fascinating book, Joseph, I must tell you. Happily, it is not very, very academic. Because that sometimes tends to alienate the lay reader. But it's really fascinating. I went through it. And it's really a fantastic saga of a name that is so familiar to all of us in Mumbai and in India. So thank you very much for sharing the journey of writing the book and the fascinating journey of the Sassoons, of not only, I would say, not just Baghdad, but also Bombay and the world. So
thank you very much, and much appreciated.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end of today's podcast. My guest today was Joseph Sassoon, a descendant of the well-known Sassoon family, very well-known in Mumbai, very well-known in India. And he's written a book on the family. It's a saga of how they rose to unprecedented heights and how basically the rise and decline of the Sassoons. It's called Global Merchants, the Enterprise and Extravagance of the Sassoon Dynasty.
You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, the real-life Suryavanshi Vishwas Nagare Patil joins CP Law & Order, talks to Cyrus about his new book, Head Held High. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Anusha Ramakrishna and Anisha Dosa, co-founders at Jiffy. They discuss the concept of earned wage access and its benefits. Hans Vani completes 100 episodes. Listen to this inspiring story of a boy's struggle called Shambuk, Platform or Pilla. On The Habit Coach, Ashton shares tips of how we can make our lives 10 times better. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk analyze China's recently announced National Computing Network. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, please don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. And remember, you can always check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube to take a look at what those channels are. We're also doing a small listener survey to understand how you respond to our shows and the advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It really helps us build better shows for you and understand what you're looking for from advertising and what we can talk to advertisers about who you are. please go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. It really, really, really would help us out. Thank you so much. And finally, would like to thank our sponsors for the network this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
We know you love fast food,
Fast fashion,
faster payment.
lightning fast internet speed.
Then why not fast information?
On Think Fast, where we discuss the latest developments in the world of technology, business, marketing, pop culture.
With a side of sarcasm and my dad jokes, not just mine.
Not mine, Varun. My jokes are funny. So join me, guys, the funnier one, Suchita Salvan, co-founder of LBB.
And me, Varun Dugirala, the co-founder of The Glitch, as we think fast only on the IVM network.
Fresh episodes out every Wednesday.
On the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.